What if I told you that as a trans person, I'm glad to see President Trump pushing back against the modern trans movement? Because I am. Here's why it's not hypocritical and why it makes perfect sense for trans people to support his efforts to stop trans ideology's influence on society. Most actual transsexuals transitioned to live happy, fulfilling lives, not to rewrite societal norms or redefine fundamental truths. We didn't ask for compelled speech, for the erasure of women's sports and spaces, or irreversible medical procedures for minors. A small but loud group of radical activists did. They have completely shifted the goalpost, causing division, confusion, and ultimately harming the very people they claim to protect. Real discussions about LGBT issues, LGBT rights, are drowned out by radical activism, fueling backlash and increasing scrutiny on all trans people. Today I want to share my opinions about the specific laws Donald Trump has passed regarding transgender ideology. The laws are 1. Defining sex as binary, 2. Restricting medical transitions for minors, 3. Banning transgender women in women's sports, 4. Elimination of X gender markers on passports. Number 1. Trump signed an order mandating that the federal government recognize only two immutable sexes, male and female. Based on reproductive biology, this order affects federal documentation and prison assignments.
As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
I love it, because there are only two sexes, there are only two genders. And the government shouldn't recognize any more genders. What you do in your personal life, what you identify as in your personal life, is up to you. You should still have the freedom to do so. But the government shouldn't affirm people's delusions. There's no such thing as being non-binary. The people claiming to be non-binary exist, of course, but they're not non-binary. It's not a thing. There's a million ways you could be a man and a woman, but there are not a million genders. I also love the fact that now male SA offenders can't suddenly identify as women and then being put in women's prisons. I cannot believe it was a thing or is a thing still in other countries. What is going on? It's disgusting. Number 2. An executive order was issued to halt federal support for gender transitions for individuals under 19. It directs federal agencies to exclude coverage for such care under programs like Medicaid and TRICARE and urges the Department of Justice to oppose these practices through litigation and legislation.
I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care, process that includes giving kids puberty blockers, mutating their physical appearance, and ultimately performing surgery on minor children. I will then ask Congress to permanently stop federal taxpayer dollars from being used to promote or pay for these procedures and pass a law prohibiting child sexual mutilation in all 50 states. It'll go very quickly. I will declare that any hospital or healthcare provider that participates in the chemical or physical mutilation of minor youth will no longer meet federal health and safety standards for Medicaid and Medicare and will be terminated from the program immediately. Furthermore, I will support the creation of a private right of action for victims to sue doctors who have unforgivably performed these procedures on minor children. The Department of Justice will investigate Big Pharma and the big hospital networks to determine whether they have deliberately covered up horrific long-term side effects of sex transitions in order to get rich at the expense of vulnerable patients, in this case, very vulnerable.
I think this is my favorite law. And I also love how the limit is 19 and not 18, because transitioning is such a serious and life-altering decision, and I don't think that most 18-year-olds are old enough to go through it. I was 20 when I transitioned, so. Number 3, Trump signed an order titled keeping men out of women's sports, which prohibits transgender women and girls from participating in female sports teams at educational institutions. The order threatens to revoke federal funding from schools that allow such participation.
With this executive order, the war on women's sports is over. Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women. With my action this afternoon, we're putting every school receiving taxpayer dollars on notice that if you let men take over women's sports teams or invade your locker rooms, you will be investigated for violations of Title IX and risk your federal funding. There will be no federal funding.
I'm not even American, but I feel so relieved. This is brilliant. I think that the question, should trans women be in women's sports, is so easy to answer. Hell no. Sports is divided by sex. And it's not divided by gender identity, what people claim to be, or feel like they are. Sports is about bodies, not identification. Sports is about bodies competing against other bodies. That's it. Women's sports is only for females. And keeping males out of female spaces is not against any human right. Competing in sports is not a human right. Almost all real trans women already know this and already have this opinion. It's not that groundbreaking, it's not that shocking. Actual trans women don't want to make women uncomfortable in their spaces, in their locker rooms, and in their sports. This law is not anti-trans at all, because the trans women competing in women's sports are men in their 40s who've been on estrogen for maybe a year. And they don't make the effort, they haven't made the effort to look like women in any way. They know that due to their biology, they're stronger than women, so they would most likely win. The law has nothing to do with trans people. All the laws I'm mentioning today have nothing to do with trans people. Actual trans people. I'll get back to that. Number 4, executive order defining sex strictly as male or female. The State Department ceased issuing passports with an X gender marker and suspended processing applications requested gender marker changes. Great, I just don't understand that it even was a thing to be gender neutral in your passport. Why? Why? There's no such thing as being gender neutral. Just because you're a woman with short green hair and a nose piercing doesn't mean that you're gender neutral. It's actually pretty offensive to believe that cutting your hair and coloring it in a weird color makes you less of a woman. You're not fooling anyone if you have an X in your passport. I've made a separate video about the whole gender marker passport thing, and I think I'll leave a link down below so you can watch it. I'm sick and I'm about to lose my voice, so I can't go into depth about it right now. In my opinion, President Donald Trump is doing the right thing. Someone has to be the adult in the room, especially the US president, no matter who it is, and say stop to these harmful activists. We all know by now that these activists have crossed the line over and over again, and they are not willing to back down. We all know that they say one thing, but do another. Whenever they say protect trans kids, it means sterilize them with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. Remember, they gaslight, manipulate, and emotionally blackmail people into getting what they want. If trans activists were 100% honest about what will happen to children if you let them transition, all the side effects, all the consequences, no politician in America or in Europe would ever allow it. But it was allowed and still is allowed, unfortunately, in many countries because activists claimed that children would off themselves if they didn't get access to the medical transition. It was all bullshit though, and they don't care about kids, the gender-confused kids, trans-identified kids, just kids in general. If they did, they would have listened to all of the backlash they have received over the years. But instead of listening to people who are against children transitioning, they shame them, trying to ruin their reputation by calling them anti-trans and trans kids and anti-kids. If you actually mean well and you have great intentions, you wouldn't personally attack a person who is just as much passionate about a topic as you. You would be curious to know what they think. You would listen. That's how it works when being an adult and a normal person. We can't move forward as a society until we acknowledge how toxic woke queer activists are and are not worth compromising or negotiating with. We cannot protect women and children's rights until we push these people out of politics completely. They just can't sit at the adults' table. It is what it is. We all have to understand that the activists are wolves in sheep's clothing. That's why I constantly say, and I can't say this enough, that these people are not truly trans. They pretend to be it just to push their harmful ideology. There's nothing anti-trans about what President Trump is doing. Nothing. Transsexuals, adults, can do whatever they want. The only thing they can't do is lie in their official documents about their sex. But we don't want to. We don't want to lie. We know who we are, what we are. Only activists, the harmful activists, don't want to acknowledge it. When pushing men into women's spaces, when pushing children into medical transitions, trans activists have completely ruined the trans acceptance. So many regular people and many politicians hate anything trans now. So I think Trump reversing all this bullshit could potentially help the trans acceptance. That's all I have for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think about President Trump's new anti-trans laws? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know. If you want to see more content like this, remember to hit subscribe and the notification bell. I love you all and I cannot wait to read your comments down below. Peace out.